So, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Afif. I take care of product management and design community management here at ProApp. And today we are diving into UX research because it is the cornerstone of UX design, and specifically an important subcategory of UX research, which is quantitative UX user research. So, quantitative user research is what most people imagine when they think of research data. It's numerical or statistical information obtained through highly controlled testing environments. So, don't worry, I am not going to speak for the full length of today's session. That's not my forte, as we have Yogesh here with us. A little bit about him. Yogesh has been an interaction designer for more than 5 years, and he has worked with design agencies and product companies throughout his experience. In his own words, he loves designing user-centered digital solution, and lately he has been mentoring design students, and he tells us that he absolutely loves each bit of his interactions with curious budding designers. So all of you, don't forget to do that with him, interact with him as much as you can. So what are we waiting for? Yogesh, it's enough of me, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Afif, and for a warm introduction. I hope all of you can hear me well. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. All right, so I'll start with sharing my screen. Cool. So our topic of today is quantitative user experience research, right? But before we dive deep into the topic, I want to talk about who is this session for, right? So this session might be valuable to you if you're a design student still in college, right, and trying to expand their knowledge of different user research methods. It might also be useful if you're a professional in some other field looking to move into user experience design, right? So it will help you get good understanding of quantitative side of user experience research. And also if you're a user experience visual design professional in an agency setup with some years of experience. So usually due to short timelines in an agency setup, you might not get to do, user behavior tracking, because by the time you're done with it, you move on to the next project. So you're not that deeply involved with the product to be able to track all those user behaviors and continuously learn and improve based on that. It might not be very useful for you if you already currently work in a product organization that has a significant user experience maturity, since you might have already done such quantitative user research activities and might find the content of this session rudimentary. However, now that you're here, right, I'd suggest hang around. Maybe something will interest you. I have something that might interest you. All right. So that being said, let's start with what is user research, right? So in simplest terms, again, this is probably too simple of a definition that I put it here. That is understanding user behaviors, needs, and motivations through interviews, usability evaluations, right? And other form of feedback methodologies. Now, this other form of feedback methodology is important because most of our focus is going to be on this part. And why do we do user research? Again, in such terms, we do it to understand our users better and what we should build for them, right? Instead of assuming things on their behalf. As a designer, I mean, everyone, all designers will make assumptions. You need to make assumptions at times, right? But we should be trying to limit those assumptions to as much as possible and sort of, making sure that we are doing research and minimizing the assumptions. So I always think, right, an hour of conversation with a user is 10 times better than hours of endless debates, right, that you're having with your product team or with your fellow designers, right, about a particular interaction patterns, and when you have assumed things on behalf of the user, right? So you better go talk to a user, right? Now, there are two main categories of user research, right? One is quantitative, other one is qualitative. Quantitative is about collecting and analyzing, collective and objective and measurable data. Notice the word objective because that's the most important part, right? This objectivity is the key here. Whereas qualitative is about collecting and analyzing data in form of opinions, right? What user says, comments that they make, the behaviors that they exhibit or express, or we watch that, right? Feelings at times they express, and their motivation to use a particular application, right? Qualitative gets you results that you usually cannot convert into numbers. Quantitative obviously gets you numerical results, right? And this one is going to be the focus of our session today, right? So a little more about qualitative research before we proceed, right? As we understood earlier, right? Qualitative research is about understanding users' thoughts, behaviors, feelings, motivations, and all of it, right? And then building insights based on it, right? So you get certain insights, and keeping those insights in mind, you go ahead and build a product, design a product, right? So this qualitative research lets you get in-depth understanding of users' behavior patterns. And the next most important thing is helps you understand why behind what, right? So a user does something, right? And you do a one-on-one interview with them, you understand why they do something, right? And then based on that why, you probably probe further, or maybe that why is the answer, and you go on and build a solution around it. But qualitative research is subject to human bias. Not that quantitative isn't, it still is, but the bias can be eliminated to a certain degree, to a huge degree, I'd say, right? And it is also dependent on your interaction with the users, right? And misses to offer some unique quantitative insights. If you're not doing quantitative research, you might be missing on some unique insights. We talk about that later. So 40-45 slides only to talk about quantitative research. However, before we proceed, I want all of us to remember that we should never undervalue any type of research. Both can and do offer great insights that shape the design outcomes. So it's not either or binary relationship that's there, right? So short story, right, about the importance of qualitative research. And the reason I'm emphasizing on this is because lest I come across as someone who is like, giving a lot of importance to quantitative and not to qualitative, right? So a few years back, I was working with a telecom giant, and I was revamping a legacy call center tool, right? So it was supposed to be used by call center employees who would do things like changing a plan of a customer when the customer called them using the tool, or resolving the customer issues, or maybe upgrading their plan and things like that. Now, this tool was live for more than probably 10, 15 years. And there were no major updates to the user experience of that. So I got the opportunity to do, a new design solution for that. And when I did a usability evaluation of that solution, the users concerned, and I still remember it to state, is that, I love it. I've been waiting for something like this since last 10 years. It will greatly improve my work productivity. And, I cannot thank you enough, and I'm so eager to use it. Now, if you read this statement, right, this is what you cannot get in a completely quantitative test, right? Many such statements from the users that actually shape up the product roadmap, shape of the, your design decisions and things like that. So this communicates far more than numbers can communicate. But again, numbers are important, right? And we'll learn how those are important as we go along. So in a right said earlier, it's not either this or that. One method is not better than the other. Qual and quant go hand in hand, right? To give a well-rounded picture of the user's mental model and their behavioral patterns and their interaction patterns and things like that. I just want to check if all of you can hear me. Afif, can you confirm?
Yes, Yogesh, you are absolutely clear.
Great. All right, so now is the time to deep dive into the quantitative research, right? We're going to be, all slides after this are going to be only about the quantitative. So I strongly believe, not only I, lots of other designers, right, strongly believe the good user experience is based on evidence, right? It cannot be based on assumptions only. And the evidence mostly comes from where? Qualitative research, right? Because it's little easier to do, right? I wouldn't even agree to the fact that quantitative is harder to do. There are methods in the quantitative research that are not necessarily harder, but we just don't do those, right? And where this evidence comes from? Observations, usability testing, findings of user research. But when you use only qualitative research and evidence, right, you're overlooking a huge amount of quantitative data that can, shape up the designs. And when you measure something, right, you can improve it. So someone, I don't remember who said it, but only what you measure, you can improve it, something like that. I don't exactly remember, right? But When you measure something, you can figure out ways around it to improve, right? So some differences, right? Quantitative focuses on discovering facts. Qualitative focuses on understanding behavior of the user, right? So many times you do a quantitative first, and then based on some of the facts that you discover, you would go on and now I need to actually discover more. You would go on and understand behavior of the user. Or you might do it vice versa. You analyze numerical data in the quantitative research, whereas in the qualitative, you find out themes that users sort of generate, right? That a bunch of users said this, so probably we should go into this direction. The quantitative one will offer insights on how much of a behavior is present in a group, right? Again, how much, the numbers. Whereas the qualitative one will offer you what factors determine the behavior of a group, right? They do this, that's why they're probably saying this, right? Something like that. So it usually gets you responses in tunes of how many, the quantitative, how often, how much, right? For example, how many users click on an app ad and then download the app from the Play Store? That's a solid number for you. Likewise, let's say you are designing a server design tool, right? You yourself were designing a new server design tool, then you might want to think about, right, how often users go back to previous step and make a change if they were authoring the survey, or how much time users spend on completion of a particular flow. Let's say you were building a checkout flow, you might want to track, right, how much time they spent. All right. So some of the benefits of doing quantitative research, right, before we get deeper into the methods and the ways to do it, is it will provide you facts if you do it that are very hard to argue with, right? The data is not subjective, the same the qualitative data is. So when there is an objectivity, you can be more firm in your arguments, right? And it's not only about argument, you also get that sense, right, that this is in the right direction because the numbers support you. But again, numbers should not be looked in isolation. We'll be talking about this also in detail, why they should not be looked in isolation. They should be looked in context. Also, as we spoke briefly earlier, it offers you unique insights that probably a qualitative one won't offer you, right? For example, how a design is being used over a period of time, and then benchmark it against that. So let's say you designed a flow that took users 7 minutes to complete. You were tracking it, and then you launch something else. Now it takes them around 10 minutes to complete. Now that's a huge red flag for you as a designer. It requires to dig deeper. Now that digging deeper, again, you might have to go to qualitative part of it, right? And this sort of communicates the third point, right? That is, it gels really well with other user experience research methods. So you do certain analysis, you do certain research, and then you realize, okay, I need to do some other method now to discover more or build on top of it, right? Okay, so one of the most important things, right, when doing a quantitative research is figuring out the right sample size, right? How do you choose the right number so that you get the right insights? So what is sample size? Sample size, again, refers to the number of participants that are included in a study. This number is usually represented by n, right? Again, you can represent by anything that you want to. And the size of the sample will influence two properties. One is the precision of our estimate, how precise we are in terms of our estimate, as well as the power of the study to draw conclusions, right? Can this study, the insights that I'm getting out of this quantity study, can this be applied across all the users? Now, how can that be made sure? By choosing the right samples, right? That your study can be powerful enough to draw the conclusions. So, let's say, again, a hypothetical example, right? Very, very hypothetical. We want to compare the performance of, 12th grade students in India who eat 4 almonds every day to the performance of those who do not. And this is an exam performance that I'm talking about. Now, will it be possible to track the almond eating habits of all 12th graders in India, keeping the size of the population and everything in mind? No. What should we do then? We randomly select 100 12th graders for the study. And what is this 100? This 100 would be the sample size. Now, there's two more concepts that you need to be aware of. That is margin of error. So no matter, how thoughtful, how careful, let's say you choose a certain people from each state, you you adjust the population and the number of samples that you choose from each state by the population of that state, right? Whatever you do, there would still be a margin of error because you cannot speak to everyone. And then there's the sampling error, right? So you cannot be absolutely sure how eating almonds affects 12th grade students' exam performance, because it would be impossible to look at every instance in which these two activities coincide. There's something else that affected their exam performance, right? So this measure of error is known as sampling error. And the way to avoid the sampling error is what? Is through a right sample size, right? So larger samples, right, they tend to be associated with a smaller margin of error. And this kind of makes sense, right? Now, to get an accurate picture of the effects of eating almonds on exam students, right, we need plenty of examples to look at and compare. And that basically means, right, you keep on increasing the sample size. Why not to have an even bigger sample size, right? But turns out, not really. There's a point at which, increasing the sample size no longer impacts the sampling error. And this phenomenon is known as law of diminishing returns. We'll see a live example of this in further slides. If all of this sounds confusing, don't need to worry. You don't need to be a statistics wizard to, do your next quantitative test. There are well-defined sample size calculators on Google. SurveyMonkey has a good one, right? And you can calculate the ideal sample size there for your next quantitative study by entering a few details there. So now we're going to look at some of the examples of how the law of diminishing return comes into play as the population size increases. But okay, let's also talk about three key things. Another three key things, right? One is population size. So as we said, right, all 12th grader students in India whose opinions we want to represent. So this is total number of people whose behavior the sample will represent. The confidence interval, the probability of sample, accurately reflecting the attitude of a population, right? And then the margin of error, the range that your population's response may deviate from the sample. At times it will deviate, right? And that's margin of error. Now, if you go to SurveyMonkey and enter, let's say the population size is 10, the confidence level is 95%, you want 95% confidence in the study, and the margin of error is 5. It recommends you a sample size of 10 because the population size is so small, right? Whereas if you go ahead and let's say you increase the population size to 100, confidence level is still 95, margin of error is still 5. It shows you the sample size of 80. Now let's go on. Okay, my slides are shaking. This is what happens when you do a presentation in Rush. Okay, so you increase the population size to 1,000. Sample size is 278. Now you see it's not increasing proportionally, right? Because you don't need those many, numbers in the sample size to. I don't. Truth be told, I don't really know the algorithm behind it. There is obviously deep statistics behind it. But the point that I'm trying to communicate here, right? It's not that you want to represent, let's say you design and you work for an app that's being used by 10,000s of users, right? And you want to run a quantitative study. You don't need to go and run it with all the 10,000 of the users, right? So if you, let's say, increase it to 10,000, right? It says you 370. You increase it to 100,000, it says 385. And then you add one more zero and it still says 385. Because now the law of diminishing returns has come into picture. And even if you increase the sample size, it doesn't really make a difference, right? Unless you want to reduce the margin of error and increase the confidence level, right? So this is a brief introduction of sample size, right? So as I said, right, you do not need to be a math wizard or a statistics wizard to go and figure out this, right, and do complex logarithms and formulas to get to this. Use a tool that's there, right, and it will get you a good estimate of what should be the sample size for the next quantitative study. All right, so another some pointers to remember before we look into research methods. I want to look at chat messages once. Okay, cool. So there's something called confusing correlation with causation, right? Just because you find something in analytics as you make a change to something, right, doesn't mean that something is related to it or immediately related to it. So it might be just a coincidence, So correlation, if there is a higher correlation, there is chance of causation, right? But not necessarily always mean that because of this happened, right? This is what correlation causation is. For example, right, a positive correlation between exercise and cases of skin cancer, right? That is, the people who exercise more tend to be the people who get skin cancer. Now, is this true? This sounds absurd, right? How can people who exercise more would be the ones who will get skin cancer? So this correlation exists in the data set because people who live in the places that get a lot of sunlight year around, right, are more active in their daily lives. That's why they go out and somehow the app captures or whatever, right, captures that they do more exercise than the people who do not live in the places that are like that have sunlight year around. Now this shows up as an increase as a increased exercise, but at the same time it did not really account for daily sunlight exposure that actually caused the skin cancer. So now both of these variables, right, rate of exercise and in skin cancer, were affected by a third causal variable that actually caused two, and that's exposure to sunlight. Now, many a times in your analytics, right, you would have things like, okay, something is happening. There seems to be a strong correlation between this and this, but do not stop at that point. That correlation might or might not mean causation. You have to dig deeper and find out what might be the actual cause for it. Also, when you start tracking things, right, try to avoid tracking paying attention to vanity stuff, right? It's hard to resist that urge, right? You get the tool, you learn the analytics stuff that you have to track and all of that, right? And you say, okay, why not I track everything? That would be better, right? If I track everything, I'd get better insights, right? Not really, let's say you chose to track something a little, or non-useful, right? That the number of app downloads. Whereas if you chose, right, instead of number of app downloads, ratio of the app downloads and the amount of traffic through your ads, right, that went to the app store page. Now if the number of app downloads are not as many as the traffic that went to app store, right, you might discover so many things. Maybe the screenshots that you put in the app store for the app are not enticing enough. Or maybe the description of the app that you put is not clear enough. Or maybe the users are concerned about the large memory size of the app consumed. There are n number of possibilities that might happen. Whereas if you had only tracked the number of app downloads, that's a good metrics for a business case. But to discover the issues with the app store listing, you might want to dig deeper, right? And probe further. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that when choosing what to track, make sure you're choosing and meaningful things and putting a lot of thought behind it. Let us talk about some of the quantitative research methods now. So these are again the popular ones, right? I haven't included everything. One is quantitative usability testing. So you might have all done some usability testing in past, and how is this quantitative usability testing different from that? Not really. It's not that different actually. The purpose shifts a little here, right? Instead of asking users to go complete something and you figure out and sort of sit with them or do a remote usability test session and kind of ask them, right, that how many users, if they are able to complete something. In a quantitative setup, you would test how much time they particularly spent on something, right? And how many misclicks they made, or how much time they spent on a particular user path, right? And if they deviated from that user path, and how many of them deviated from that user path, right? So again, you are getting how many, how much, that kind of data here. It's not that different from a qualitative usability testing. And again, most of the time it's combined, it's not done in isolation, right? So you basically get all of that done. And then you have analytics, right? It gives you information such as what features users use, where users come from. Let's say you are in a B2C app, right? You might be interested in knowing all of this. Now this section analytics, we're going to spend some focus on this as we go. And then another popular method, right? A/B testing. So you basically create two different versions of a user flow interface, right? And figure out what works best for the users and perform the best, right? Surveys, again, they can produce combination of qualitative and quantitative data, ratings, right? That 85% of the users agree with the fact that design is easy to use. Whereas, let's say 10% users disagree with something, right? So you get that kind of data when you do surveys. Another one, not so popular, but useful at times, is eye tracking, right? So it can help you identify which interface and the content elements, right, need to be emphasized or de-emphasized to enable a better user experience. Now we're going to go a little deeper into all these methods, and we'll put a lot more focus to analytics part. Quantitative usability testing, right? So let's say you had to do an unmoderated usability testing through a tool called Maze, research, all of that. Why unmoderated? In unmoderated, you can use it large size. You don't have to go and sit with users or have one-on-one remote sessions with them, right? So you can, let's say, run a test with 50 users, 60 users. That's also possible, right? So these tools allow you to, these are the tools that I've used. Obviously, there are other tools out there, right? Allow you to track how much time you spent on a particular journey. And as we spoke earlier, right? Only when you track, you can benchmark. So when you run the study against the future design changes, right, it will help you learn how change you are adding is reducing the total time on task. You added one tiny flow inside an existing flow, right? You added something in the menu that came to a tertiary flow, right? Now that's maybe increasing time on task. And if time on task is important, you might want to dig deeper onto it. Or maybe you remove something, you learned something from the past analytics, right? And you realize that users are actually not using it. Let's maybe remove it from the front, or maybe let's progressively disclose it. Let's figure out an alternate for this, and you test it, right? You would again see the difference in the time of task. You might, right? And the learning curve, right, conducting a first quantitative study, usability study, is not that high. There are plenty of tools available for free, right, that obviously have reduced features that make this job easy for you. And the only additional effort that I can think of to run an unmoderated usability test that can get you quantitative as well as some qualitative data, you might still have to do some qualitative test after that, right? But the only extra effort that I can think of is detailing the prototype. Since you wouldn't be there, right? You cannot say to the user that it's just a prototype, it might have its limitations, right? Or you're not there to maneuver, help them maneuver around, right? They're on their own. They can go to any random path that they please, right? So your prototype has to be very sort of interactive. Figma might not help you do that. You might want to use some other, interactive prototyping tool like Exio and all, right? But I assure you the results will be worth it. Now let's say you do this quantitative usability test with 60 users, and you find out there are 5-6 users who are giving responses that are actually worth digging more into. Now you don't need to go and talk to all those 60 users again. You get those 5-6 users who can get you a lot of insights, and you go speak to them. Simple interview, right? And you would uncover a lot more, trust me, a lot more, had you done just a simple moderated test with 5-10 users, right? So this is a little time consuming, but very fruitful for the design. Next, analytics, right? So you need some specialized tools. We'll talk about this later, right? To set up and be able to record, right? And continuously learn from the user interaction patterns. So when I'm talking about analytics, I'm talking in terms of when a product is live, your designs are live, right? You want to learn from the user behavior. So there are some data such as bounce rates, where users come from, can be more useful in B2C context than B2B. And most of us design apps and applications and products for B2B, right? So I'd also talk about in detail what are the things that you can track actually from a B2B perspective that might help shape your designs. And there are tools such as Amplitude, Mixpanel, and all, right, that you can integrate with, that will give you much deeper insights, right? How you can track the journey through events and all of that. Now, this all the analytics stuff, you might not be able to do all of it on your own, because you need a help from a product analytics team or engineers, right? Because it's probably too much technical for a designer, right? To make sense of the data and help you conduct the fit in those triggers, events, and all of that, right? And then also help you what to analyze, right? However, as a UXer, you should be really and totally responsible for the fact that when you design something, you figure out all the places in the user journey that you created, right, where analytics could be integrated. How to figure out all these places, we'll talk about in the later slides, right? And this, if you do this and the analytics is integrated, this will help you continuously learn, right, and keep on improving the user experience. A/B testing, right? This is interesting. So this is a method, right, that is used by a lot of consumer internet companies, right? And you basically list out various possibilities and find out what works best. What works best, maybe for business, or maybe for users, or maybe for both, right? So reportedly, right, Google ran some A/B test where they tested what shades of blue work best with the users, and they apparently had a $200 million profit as a result of this study. Fascinating, right? So they basically ran a bunch of tests with shades of blue, right? I'm not getting the in detail of this study. If you're interested, you can search about shades of blue study by Google to learn more about it, right? But what I think, right, you don't always need a live version to do a A/B test, right? You don't really need a developed version. As we spoke earlier, right? When you're doing a quantitative usability test, you make a prototype, run it with 60 users. You make another prototype with some variation and run it with another 60 users. You are doing A/B test now. You are getting the output, right? Again, it's a lot of effort from creation of the prototype point, right? But if you have a strong enough case, and you don't need to be really reliant on product analytics, or and you cannot wait for that insights to uncover later, and the cost of that is too high, you could do it. And if you're running it live, right, you need some obviously training and some collaboration with other teams, right? But the learning curve, right, for learning doing things like A/B test is not as high as some other methods, such as eye tracking studies that we'll learn later. So when you do it, you have a strong case for it, I would say go do it. Surveys, right? Some of us read surveys, right? But surveys could be very handy to monitor product improvements, right? And sort of gauge a new feature perception that users might have. So there are many well-defined UX-specific survey methods, such as system usability survey, feature perception survey, and all of it that you can leverage, or you can have your own custom surveys, right? Depending on what you want to sort of get the user opinion feedback on. There's this also NPS, Net Promoter Score, right? So even though it is not specific to digital UX, it's more broad to the whole customer experience, whole customer journey. But at times, this also gets you some specific insights about the digital experience, right? You can also make use of tools like Qualtrics. This point is important, right? And do a survey. So very recently, I did a study on Qualtrics, and what I did, I embedded a Figma prototype in the Qualtrics. You can do that, and I think Qualtrics also has a free version as well, right? And when you embed a Figma prototypes, you're not only doing a survey there about the design. You actually have the Figma prototype for the users to use. You have a task for them, right? You won't be able to see if they've completed it. You can only ask them, right? But you elevate the whole study. You improve the outcomes of the study, right? If you do this. So users can first use the designs through the Figma prototype on their own, right? It has some of the drawbacks, right? Because you're not able to actually see where users are heading and all of that, right? And then after that, you basically ask them a bunch of questions. So the study is very contextual for them. I'll look at the chat once. All right. I'll answer these questions a little later. Eye tracking, right? Truth be told, I've also never done it. I only know it theoretically, right? I'm waiting for it to, I'm waiting for my first eye tracking study. But it obviously requires special equipment, right? The track users' eyes as they go through an interface. I'm speaking to you guys. I'm looking at the camera. I'm looking at the presentation. I'm also looking at my keyboard, right? If you had an eye tracking tool, you would have a nice heat map generated out of it. And with a large enough sample size, right, you start seeing meaningful insights when you do an eye tracking study. You might also find out, is what I think, right? Reading pattern of the users specific to your context. So we know that users read in F pattern. We know users at time read in some other pattern and all of it, right? But when you do a eye tracking study in the context of the application that you are designing, right, you might uncover even different insights. Maybe they did it a different pattern altogether. Then you might want to probe into, how can you improve the content hierarchy or do something else that improves the outcomes, right? Now it's highly specialized and requires obviously expensive equipments. And that is the one challenge, right? One is expensive part of it. The other is it's being highly specialized. So it has a steep learning curve. All right, so this is interesting, right? Back in 2017, I got very interested in how neuroscience relates to user experience design, right? So the difference between, for the others who do not understand, the difference between psychology and neuroscience, right? Psychology is, again, some studies being done about the human behavior and making conclusions based on that. Neuroscience goes a step deeper, right? It tries to understand the chemical basis of the human behavior. So when I speak, when I laugh, when I cry, when I get depressed, when I do whatever, right? There are certain areas of my brain that get lit up. When I say lit up, I mean probably the brain flow, the blood flow is different, the neuronal activity is different, and all of it, right? So I started thinking about, can there be a way where you do a usability test with the help of neuroscience? Like you give users a computer, you give them a design, right? And ask them to work on it, and you keep tracking what's happening in their brain. Like, what would be the better source of truth than that? There is no human bias, there is no whatever, right? And turns out that there is a device. It's called FNIR, Functional Near Infrared Spectroscopy. Now, this is little deviating from the actual session, but I want to talk about the future aspect of it and how it could really add a different dimension to quantitative side of user research, right? So you basically and they do certain tasks, and you obviously need a lot of specialized equipment and a lot of training to sort of read this data. I really can't know what's happening here, right? But this is the simple idea. So it's non-invasive, it's lightweight, right? And it can measure the blood oxygenation levels in the brain. Now, there's something called hemodynamic response, right? When I'm doing something, let's say I'm very emotional, there's a part of the brain called amygdala that gets activated. There's a huge blood flow to amygdala. And again, this is very, very generalized statement that I'm making. There are much more nuances to it that I don't really understand, right? But to put it simply, right, FNIR can help you determine which part of the brain lights up when doing some mental activity. Now, will we reach a day, right, when we add more light to our usability tests, leveraging advancements in neuroscience? Imagine the data set that this will generate, right? And how much can we rely on that? The bad news, we are very far from there, right? Neuroscientists' understanding of human brain is still in infancy. The good news is the next slide, right? I also wrote an article on this 5 years back, and I don't think anything major has happened since then in this field. On UX Design CC, you can search it by my name and you'll get it. So it turns out a bunch of researchers did a similar user experience study in 2016, and they had some early success on it, right? So they made this person wear this device and did some study. I really can't understand what are these data points, right? You can also refer the study, and you can look at the the parts of the brain that show likes, dislikes, and things like that. Now, how, like, I think this is like pinnacle of quantitative data, right? You basically get into the user's brain and you get it. So this is a long shot, right? But there's an active research going about these methods in various universities and various HCI departments in the world, right? And this might be one of the key things maybe 2-3 decades down the line. So let's go back to the current state, right? And go back to the topic. Next is, this is my favorite, right? Another favorite. I might have said something else as a favorite, right? And that is continuous user experience discovery through analytics. So you build something, you've done all the research, you've done some quantitative study also, right? How do you continuously keep on discovering when you launch something, right? Through the integration of analytics, like tool like Amplitude, Mixpanel, and all of that, right? When you integrate, how do you leverage that? So the best experiences, right? They allow users to complete the key tasks without any noise. But you launch something, you think this is the best thing. How do you keep on iterating to remove that noise? How do you keep on bettering the user experience? So let's say you were designing for B2B applications, right? You've done your qualitative research and a fair idea of needs, motivations, and pain points of your users. You also have the requirements defined, right? You build a design solution, do a quick moderated usability test, and all hunky-dory so far. But what next? Would you not want to continuously learn how users are interacting with your design and what to learn? Now, this what to learn part is tricky. So meet a designer called Preet. He's our designer. And he says, now that my designs are live, how should I learn from users, how my users are using my designs? Or what should I track? And how should I track? Or if all of this is an overkill, right? And I would do some interviews to find out, right? Do I really need to do all of this? I'd have to convince a bunch of stakeholders to make this happen. So Preet goes to Rahul. Rahul is, let's say, a senior designer, right? Or someone who has experience in this. Rahul says, a cliche, right? What you don't measure, you can't improve. So it's very important to track important interaction patterns in a live application. But how do you decide which one should you track and how? Ask Preet to Rahul. Rahul says, these items are must track, right? So an interaction pattern that you built and it does not have a strong user ask backing it. You do it because of some gut feeling. Now that gut feeling, because at times users necessarily don't know what is best for them. You make certain assumptions and based on that assumption, you build for them, right? This might be very well true, but have some objectivity behind it. Track it, you will learn better. Likewise, you assume it would be a key interaction for one of the key jobs to be done by the user, right? Also, you've done some interaction because of some heuristics, and it is similar to one of the interaction patterns that users are using. So you think, okay, this should also be there. But why it should be there if this is not even needed, right? If they're not even using it, you can remove it. Or you can progressively disclose it. It need not to be upfront. The more the things you remove, the simpler the user experience gets. Obviously, you need to give them all the things that they need, but to find out what all they need, you need to continuously learn. All right. Also, he says specifically track items such as it is an interaction pattern that requires one-time learning curve. So one-time learning curve is not wrong, right? You might have built something and you might have kept it a little advanced interaction, right? Thinking that it's a one-time learning curve, users will get it later. And you did it for a reason. Example, WhatsApp, right? You want to forward a message to someone, or you want to mark something star. Imagine you had a star below each message. You had a forward below each message that is there in the WhatsApp. Whereas WhatsApp doesn't do it. You tap on the message, long press on it, you select it, and then you get a way to forward it. So this is one-time learning curve actually. We got so used to it, so it doesn't feel difficult, right? But it's one-time learning curve. So things like this, right? The one-time learning curves that you build in an application because you think that this will make the application more smarter, more clean, more less noisy, right? You should definitely track it. And also, if it is an interaction pattern that you debated a lot with a bunch of other designers, teammates, and you could not really come to a consensus. You did it because, again, of some gut feeling, right? You should track that too. That's also very important to track, right? Some other items to track could be, tracking the events and key user journeys, misclicks, drop rates. It entirely depends on the context, right? Let us look at some of the examples that this through a lens of example, right? So look at this design, right? This I randomly took from Dribble, right? I don't really understand the context behind this design or who did it and all of that, right? But to demonstrate the point, right? Notice the link called integration settings here. So this designer put it, right? Because they were sure, right, that this would be a key journey that users would take, like when they are selecting the FTP profile. Again, I'm saying I don't have any context about this design. I'm just taking this example about how do you identify what pointers to track, right? Because this design is going to be a key journey that users can take. Like they might want to go to integration settings when they are selecting this FTP profile, or because they thought on behalf of their users, right? And there's no actually ask for it, and realize that users might want to set up their FTP profiles once they see the FTP selection drop down. So if it's a latter case, this definitely warrants an analysis, right? You say, after you launch and then you learn that less than 1% of users are actually clicking on it. Now that's a definite red flag. Do you really need it to be upfront? Can it not go sit in a kebab menu? Can it not go sit in a more menu? This removes then this clutter from the screen, right? Or alternatively, you also maybe you discover that most of the users are actually going to integration settings even before doing anything else. Now, this requires you to rethink the entire design journey, obviously big more, right? And then rethink the entire journey. So the idea is, right, that you learn from the user behavior through identifying each screen that you build, the assumptions that you have, and start tracking it, how users are using it and things like that. Another example, right? So this, to me, I don't know what this design is for, but this status tag looks like a button to me. So the process badge in the label, right? Let's say during design reviews, you had some other designer expressing that users might confuse you with a button, but you designed it and you think users won't confuse you with button. You also did a moderate test with 5 users and they did not confuse you with the button. But then maybe you have that feel, right? And maybe there is actually a case for this looking like a button. So you start tracking it, right? That how many users actually go look at it or click on it. And if there's a significant number that actually click on it, that means they're expecting a button there. And why they're expecting a button and things like that. So essentially what I'm trying to say right here is that again, all of this is very vague. This won't apply to this particular design. I don't know the context of this design, but you have to put the screen in front of you, stare at it, and give assumption score to everything, right? What you are really sure of, what are the assumptions, and assumptions definitely need to be tracked. Things that you are really sure of, if they're the key user journeys, you should track that as well. All right, so it all makes sense to Preet now, right? But the question is, which tool does he need to use to track, make sense of all this data? As I said, right, there are plenty of tools in market like Amplitude, Mixpanel. You most likely won't know how to operate those or use those. I still don't know. I take help from engineers and analytics people, right, to make this happen. And then, so last question, right? He's happy about it, and the tool will help him track everything, right? In the meantime, he can focus on other important stuff. Well, the answer to that is yes and no, right? You need to start digging into user behavior. As soon as you launch, then based on your data, you make your design changes. And you need to keep benchmarking and keep improving it. For example, if the average time to purchase was 55 seconds, and after the recent redesign, the average time to complete purchase is now 43 seconds. So even though you keep getting the other data, design still live, you start thinking about and start iterating about, could you improve it further? And things like that. This is the direction that actually helped us get 9 seconds, 11 seconds lesser. Could we do something else about it? All right. So with that being said, important question, right? How do I convince the stakeholders to this? Now that's probably the hardest part, right? So you need to, first of all, you need to have a receptive team, right? Who would agree to do this when presented a strong business case for it, right? If I do this, this would result in based on the data that I learned from analytics, it would result in this much business improvement or business process improvement, and versus this much user experience improvement or revenues or whatever, right? So you have to tie it with the user experience and business outcomes and push for it, right? You might have low initial success in the early days, right? Then try other quantitative methods, show them the output that it can bring for them, right? And then try to convince them again. It's a long journey, right? That you might have to take. Many a times, many product organizations, right? This is part of the process. You don't need to convince anyone. But what if you're not that lucky? If your organization doesn't have this as a process, right? So you have to build a case around it. Now, the overview that I gave about the analytics is just a primer to get you excited about the world of quantitative research analytics. To do your first study, I would urge you to explore more resources on your own, right? Reach out to me on LinkedIn if you need specific help, right? But I'll share some resources as well, right? But this is how you can start on the analytics part if the product is already live, and then as we talked about some quantitative methods as well. Some content for this presentation was taken from NN Group. NN Group is a very good resource for you to explore these research methods. There's a book called Researching UX Analytics. You must read it if you're interested in this. This talks a lot in B2C context, but I think this would be a very good overview for you to understand this. And yeah, that's all. There's another book called Customer Analytics for Dummies by O'Reilly publication, I guess. So you might want to explore that as well. Thank you. That's all.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Yogesh. I mean, there's really so much to learn from this. I can't even count those things. So yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I hope everyone really liked the session as much as I did. Yeah, I mean, we can stop screen sharing. We are very much into the end, towards the end. So all right, guys, if you have any questions in your mind, now would be the best time to go about it, because we are diving into our Q&A session. So all right, let's start with by taking them one on one. Okay, so there's a question that should margin error be 100, and confidence level a question. I don't know what is this, what is the context behind this.
Right. So I think this was asked when I was talking about margin of error, right? No, not really, right? If you keep it 100, then you have to have the sample size equal to the population size. And you can't really meaningfully do it, right? So it's okay to 2-3%, 5% is fine, right? You're just trying to make sure that you can apply those insights to the larger sample size.
Okay. All right. Okay, so Soham asks, how different is qualitative from quantitative research? I mean, that was the whole question around the across the time. So yeah, what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative research on UX point of view?
So that's what I talked about throughout the session, right? Again, I'd reiterate, right? You're dealing more with the numbers. You are tracking the user behavior in the quantitative, whereas qualitative is more like one-on-one conversation, diary studies, and things like that, right? Where you are getting user opinions, feedback, comments, and digging more deeper into it, right? Now it's not, again, as I said, right? It's not that one is more important than the other. Both are important, right? Both get you a different level of insights.
Okay, which one do you prefer? Like, I mean, which one do you emphasize more on?
So I'd say there's nothing to prefer as such. Obviously, as designers in industry, a lot of us do a lot of qualitative studies, right? And the reason I chose this topic is because there's some paranoia or some fear about doing a quantitative test, because it seems very math types or many very statistics types, right? So one of the goals of this session was to make it simple, right? And tell you all that it's not that complex. There are methods that you can adopt to get the quantitative data that are not that hard, right? So we should explore these methods.
Makes sense. All right, so Gauri Shankar has a question. That is there an alternative to A/B testing?
So there's something very close called multivariate testing, right? Where you are trying multiple variations in the design, where compared to A/B test. But again, you're just testing two options. It's a question of one variable or multiple variables.
All right. Yeah. All right. So Pradipta has a question. That what is shades of blue study and Figma prototype?
Oh, so shades of blue study. If you just Google on Google, like if you Google, right, shades of blue study by Google, you'd get it. So this study was about how Google tried different shades of blue in one of their product design experiments, right, one of the products, and how it impacted the business outcomes. So I'd say this will be a little out of scope to talk about the study in detail. This is an interesting study. I would urge all of you to, go through it. There is a divided opinion among for this study in the design community. Some designers feel, right, the design is, you know, um, this level of empirical research, or this level of research, right, in a study, sort of takes the artistic side away from the design, and you're trying to optimize it so much. But then again, it's all about the outcomes, so it works for them, so it works.
Right. All right. So the next question would be, how do you identify the required research methods in the whole design process?
Sure. So you basically start many a times. You depends on where you start, right? You already start an existing product that's live. The first thing that you should be looking for before doing any research is look for the sources of analytics. Is there any already a Google Analytics built for it, or any other analytics, right? Do I have the sources of truth for it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one quantitative source for you right in the very beginning. And then you do more exploratory research through qualitative means and try to understand the behavior patterns and all of that, right? Build an assumption around it, build the product. And again, this is where quantitative side comes into picture again. So it's again like a circle that you keep on doing. So it's not that you do this at this stage and you do other one at the other stage. So
Right.
you can do anything at each stage, whatever you deem appropriate or the project deems appropriate.
Got it. All right. So Dominic asks that what prototyping tool is better than Figma? Just a second. What prototyping tool is better than Figma to have more interactive prototypes in unmoderated usability sessions?
Sure, Dominic. So I would recommend Axure, right? Axure, even though it has a little steep learning curve, right? But it can give you very high fidelity prototypes. So you can even enter the names, password, whatever, right? It feels like a real application.
All right.
But it has a steep learning curve.
Right. Pradipta, okay, you cannot see any visualization work. Understanding in any visualization work is shown related to UX research. Sure, I mean, we can definitely host another session with Yogesh around more practical resources that he can probably visualize and show them to you. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, I mean, one question that I personally have, Yogesh, is generally around UX research. What happens is many organizations don't tend to dedicate a lot of time and give their designers enough time to do research, and they want to dive in straight on implementation. So yeah, I mean, how do you tackle that as a designer? How do you communicate it clearly?
Right. So one short answer is exit out of that organization, right?
Sorry.
Exit out of that organization, go to better places that value user research, right? But again, that's not a practical solution. The practical solution is you fight for it. How do you fight for it? You show the value to the stakeholders who are not realizing the importance of user research. You do it in extra time, right? Even though it might seem like, why am I doing it when no one is seeing value in it? But then when you do it, first of all, you learn it. It's better for your career, right? Second, maybe they'll see the value in it. You do it once, twice, thrice, they'll start seeing value in it. And if they still do not see value in it, still do not dedicate time towards it, maybe then this is a clear-cut signal to move on.
Right. All right. So yeah, I mean, that's it for the questions. If any of you had any questions but couldn't ask them to Yogesh right away, don't worry about that. You can reach out to us and we'll definitely try to answer them for you. Or you can reach out to Yogesh directly on his LinkedIn as well. So yeah, thanks a lot, Yogesh. I mean, this was really important for us to know as to how UX research is an important step in the whole design process. So thanks a lot for sharing, and for everyone who joined in, thanks a lot for tuning in on a Saturday. Uh, yes, the recording of the session. So those of you who missed any part of it, don't worry. We have recorded this whole session, and it will be live on our YouTube channel very soon. So stay tuned for that. And quick, just a quick thank you to all of you. We are conducting mentorships on ProApp channels, and for everyone present here, we are offering this early bird offering to you guys so that you can benefit from the same. So go ahead, fill out the form, and see how this could be beneficial for you. Back to Yogesh. Yogesh, thanks a lot again for such an informative session. I hope we keep on doing further sessions like this. And see you guys next Saturday for our next workshop. So
yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was great to connect with you all. Bye, everyone.
Bye.